To those fighter jets that the government just announced earlier this morning, the New Democrats right now commenting on Harper government's controversial $16 billion purchase of 65 new fighter jets. Ontario MP Malcolm Allen speaking for the New Democrats now. Let's listen in.
Once again, their actions does not match their words. New Democrats support Canada's men and women in the Canadian Forces, and we want them to have the best equipment for the job they have to do. But the bottom line here is there has to be a plan and a reason for an expenditure like this, and the government must use a transparent process that ensures they get good value for our tax dollars. Thank you, and I'll be pleased to take any questions.
Hi, I'm Laura Stone from Post Media. I'm just wondering, today at the announcement, MacKay did say that this contract was awarded through a competitive process that began over a decade ago. So he's answered that. He's answered that criticism. Is he lying, or what's your response to?
Well, the competitive process that the minister is talking about is actually internal to the U.S. in the sense of who would build the F-35. And so what they decided was they would build an F-35. We actually came on stream at the third phase of that, where we bought into it. So the sense that they're building an F-35 is fine. The issue for the Canadian Defence Department is the F-35 what we want? And the fact that there are two other competitors out there that build aircraft that perhaps we might want to look at that might meet our needs is something that would lead us to a competitive bid process. But first and foremost, you need to do an analysis of actually what do you need? Do you need 65 F-35s? No one's answered that question. When you look at the 79 CF-18s that we have, we used to station a great many of them in a place called Baden-Solingen in Germany when NATO bases were manned by Canadian and U.S. troops and fighter jets. We no longer have a base in Baden-Solingen in Germany. We no longer have fighter jets stationed around the world. We're basically buying these for Canadian duties. So if that's the case, do we need fighter jets with a single engine for Canada? Is that an appropriate purchase? That's a question that hasn't been answered by this government.
Mr. MacKay also mentioned the fact that there might be, by the time these fighter jets are put to use by about 2016, there might be a conflict that comes up, or there might be some sort of international mission required at that point that's unforeseen right now. What do you make of that?
Well, whether we have another mission in the future or not is to be determined by the Canadian Parliament as to whether we be in another combat mission at some point in the future. At this point, what we're saying is, what is our defense needs in the 21st century? No one knows that. The Defense Department has not sat down and done an analysis for almost, close to 17 years. I think the last white paper was in 1993. So if we don't know what our needs are going forward, how do we know what to buy? And that's a critical issue here. We really need to decide. New Democrats are fully supportive of our men and women in the armed forces and making sure that they get the needed materials, the needed services that they require to do their job. But we have to decide what it is they're going to do, and we haven't done that.
And just lastly, just to clarify, so you're saying that that the process that began in 1997 or over a decade ago was Canada always looking at the F-35s and not opening the gaze to anything else, or?
Well, basically, it was a U.S. initiative that said we're going to get a new fighter aircraft for all of our wings of the forces in the U.S. The U.S. at one time actually had 3 different style of aircraft for their Marines, their Navy, and their Air Force. And now what they decided to do was to get one. And they looked to others and said, would you like to come in this process? Lockheed Martin is saying we need the others, Canada, Italy, Denmark, or the Netherlands rather, and the UK and Australia to buy in to keep the US costs down. So we were there looking at an F-35 as a potential. We weren't locked in. We were told that we could get out. And so what we need to do is to, first of all, decide what are our needs? Do we need a fighter jet? Then decide which is the best one to buy for what we need to do as a Canadian Defence Force, and then go to an open process that says, here's our needs, who is going to be able to supply it for us, and what cost, and can we get the best price?
Josh?
What do you make of the fact that the government won't say how much maintenance will cost? And should we be concerned that we're not being given the total cost?
Well, it's like writing a blank check. It's like buying a house and saying, well, I don't know what my energy costs are going to be. I don't know what my utility costs will be. and I don't know how much my taxes are going to be, but I'm going to buy the house. And what they've done is they've simply said one or two things. They're either inept and Cabinet doesn't know, and that's a huge mistake to buy something and not know what the future costs, because we know the cost going forward for a jet that is going to take us a life cycle of 25 to 40 years, depending what that cost would be, or they're not telling us because they know the cost is high and they don't want to actually shock Canadians and say that $9 billion might be 16, might be 18, might be $20 billion, when indeed they're asking Canadians to pull in their belts come the next budget. The Minister the Minister Flaherty yesterday in New Brunswick is talking about telling provincial governments across this land that what they ought to do is tighten in their health care costs as they head forward. At the same time, they're suggesting they can spend $9 billion or more, because they don't want to tell us the true number, on procuring 65 aircraft.
Can you? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
You know, we had the announcements of the re-announcement of the Navy ship. You know, the intent to buy new Navy ships earlier this week, and Minister Ambrose was mentioning the purchasing of the LAVs that was announced last week or earlier this month. So we're getting a lot of military-based announcements right now from the government. Can you speculate on why you think this is happening?
In some cases, in the Navy's case, it's an old announcement, and one that we welcome. They've actually drawn it down. If we look when it comes to the joint supply ships, they announced 2 in the previous budget 2 years ago. In 2008, they said they were going to build 3. So at a time when the Navy basically is tied up in the dry dock, they don't have enough money to actually put sailors on those ships. We saw a report earlier this year where an admiral was complaining that he didn't have enough fuel to send his ships to sea. And we have the longest coast of any country in the world. It seems that we ought to be making sure that that's a need that the Navy has. And again, without knowing and doing an analysis of what we need in the 21st century, how do you make a determination on making reasonable expenditures and determining what are the needs of the armed forces to ensure that they can do their job?
Sharon, actually, I was at the press conference, and it's actually the ministers said, and Ms. Ambrose said that they have an estimate on the cost. So isn't it, I mean, they're actually withholding it, aren't they? I mean, if they have an estimate of the cost of maintenance costs over 20 years, I mean, it goes beyond not knowing. They know.
Well, of course, I wasn't there, and I appreciate you enlightening me. If indeed they know what the cost of the estimate is, and they're withholding it from Canadians, then I can only surmise that the price tag would shock Canadians. And if that's the case, it's incumbent upon this government, especially one that said that they would be accountable and transparent, that they tell Canadians what that true cost is. Because at the end of the day, we're asking Canadians to pay for it through their taxes. And in this particular case, this government does not have a surplus. It has one of the largest deficits ever. And it's about to put us into a greater deficit by these expenditures and asking Canadians to foot the bill. So at the very least, if they have that estimate, and I take you at your word, that that the Minister Ambrose said they had one, then they should have told us. It's only incumbent upon them as government to be clear with Canadians when they're asking for their money, that they tell them exactly what the true costs are and not hide them.
Brendan, did you have a question? Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Ontario MP